The lecture hall buzzed with the usual mix of alien languages and universal standard as Professor Kexthera's four arms gestured at the holographic display. Sarah Chen sat in the back row, her worn backpack slouched against her chair, trying to stay awake through another mind-numbing session on galactic economic theory. Around her, students from dozens of species scribbled notes with various appendages, their bioluminescent patches flickering with concentration. The Terran economy, Professor Kexthera droned, her insectoid features betraying obvious disdain, remains a fascinating study in primitive resource allocation. Despite their recent inclusion in the galactic community, humans continue to exhibit remarkably inefficient distribution patterns. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She never said anything. That was the point. The Zilithian student beside her, whose name she'd never bothered to learn, chittered softly to his companion. Typical human stubbornness. They refuse to adapt to proper galactic standards. Sarah glanced at her chronometer. 15 more minutes. Then she could escape to her dormitory and prepare for tonight's mission. The irony wasn't lost on her that in 12 hours, she'd be leading a strike team against Korthak raiders, while these same classmates debated the merits of her species' economic policies. Her personal communicator vibrated with an encrypted message. Mission parameters updated. Korthak fleet movements detected in Sector 7. Departure moved to 1900 hours. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. Around her, students continued their casual discussion of human inadequacies. I heard they still use physical currency in some regions, laughed a Vorthon student, her crystalline features sparkling with amusement. How barbaric. Sarah's fingers twitched toward the combat knife hidden beneath her standard-issue university jacket. The same knife that had ended 3 Korthak warriors just 2 weeks ago during the defense of Colony Epsilon 7. But here, she was just another face in the crowd. Just another human struggling to keep up with superior galactic intellects. The professor's attention suddenly fixed on her. Miss Chen, perhaps you'd like to enlighten us about your species' attachment to these outdated economic structures. Every head in the lecture hall turned toward Sarah. Dozens of alien eyes, some compound, some with multiple pupils, all focused on the unremarkable human in the back row. She could feel their expectation, their assumption that she'd stumble through some inadequate, defensive human civilization, if only they knew that. The same hands they watched fumble, with her stylus had piloted a damaged fighter through an asteroid field while under heavy fire. If only they knew that her primitive human brain had outmaneuvered a Korthak battle computer and saved an entire colony. I think, Sarah said carefully, that different species evolve different solutions to similar problems. What works for one might not work for another. The professor's mandibles clicked dismissively, a diplomatic non-answer. How very human. Laughter rippled through the hall. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced her expression to remain neutral. 3 rows ahead, a group of Altarian students whispered among themselves, their elongated heads bobbing in what she recognized as mockery. The humans' refusal to embrace standardized galactic currency has cost the community billions in conversion inefficiencies. Professor Kexthera continued, turning back to her display. Yet they persist in their stubborn individualism. Sarah thought about the Korthak supply depot she'd destroyed last month. The intelligence gathered there had revealed a massive raid planned against the Altarian homeworld. The same Altarians now snickering at her people's economic policies would never know that a stubborn human had saved their planet. Her communicator buzzed again. Intel update. Korthak fleet larger than expected. Requesting additional human units for Operation Starbreak. Sarah almost smiled at that. Additional human units. The Galactic Military Command had learned something that these university elites hadn't. When the shooting started, when lives hung in the balance, they called for humans. Not because of their advanced technology or their economic efficiency, but because humans had something else, something that couldn't be quantified in their precious galactic databases. The human tendency toward emotional decision-making, the professor was saying, represents perhaps their greatest weakness in galactic commerce. Logic and efficiency must always supersede sentiment. A Korthak plasma bolt had missed Sarah's head by centimeters during the Battle of Rigel Station. She'd felt its heat singe her hair, as she'd made what any logical analysis would have called a suicide run against their command ship. But humans didn't always choose logic. Sometimes they chose courage. Sometimes they chose sacrifice. Sometimes they chose to stand when every rational calculation said to run. The Korthak commander had called her insane before she'd rammed her fighter into his ship's reactor core. He was probably right, but his fleet had retreated, and 3 human colonies were still free. Tomorrow, Professor Kexthera announced, we'll be examining the economic impact of military expenditures. I trust our human students will find this particularly enlightening, given their species' unfortunate propensity for violence. Sarah gathered her things as students filed out around her. Propensity for violence? If only they knew how carefully controlled that violence was, how precisely it was applied, how it was the shield that protected them all while they sat in their comfortable lecture halls debating the inadequacies of human civilization. The Zilithian student brushed past her, his scales rustling with what might have been amusement. "Try not to take it personally," he said in accented universal standard. "The professor is hard on all the lesser-developed species." Sarah watched him leave, then shouldered her backpack. In 6 hours, she'd be suiting up in combat armor. In 8 hours, she'd be leading 50 of the galaxy's finest warriors into battle against impossible odds. In 10 hours, she might be dead, but right now she was just another face in the crowd. Just another human trying to prove she belonged in galactic society. She made her way through the university corridors, past aliens of a dozen different species, all of them confident in their superiority over the newcomer humans, none of them knowing that the quiet girl from Earth had already earned the highest military decoration the galactic community could bestow. None of them knowing that when darkness fell across the galaxy, it was humans who stepped forward to hold the line. Sarah Chen walked toward her dormitory, unremarkable and unnoticed. In a few hours, she would transform into something else entirely, but for now she was content to be invisible. After all, the best weapons were often the ones nobody saw coming. Sarah's dormitory room looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. The modest living space of a struggling exchange student. Textbooks scattered across a cheap desk, laundry hanging from improvised lines, and a small food synthesizer that only worked on alternate days. The perfect cover for someone who definitely wasn't a decorated war hero. She pressed her palm against what appeared to be a water stain on the wall. The biometric scanner recognized her instantly, and a hidden panel slid open to reveal military-grade equipment that would have made her classmates' compound eyes bulge. Combat armor hung on specialized hooks, weapons were secured in foam-lined compartments, and multiple communication devices blinked with encrypted messages. The irony hit her again as she pulled on her tactical suit. 3 hours ago, Professor Kexthera had been lecturing about humanity's technological limitations. The professor would probably faint if she knew that Sarah's primitive armor incorporated adaptive camouflage, technology that surpassed anything in the galactic military's standard arsenal. Her secure communicator chimed with an incoming call. Commander Vextar's reptilian features appeared on the screen, his usual stern expression somehow more intense than usual. "Lieutenant Chen, the situation has escalated. Our intelligence was wrong about the Korthak fleet size. They're not planning a raid, they're planning an invasion." Sarah's blood went cold. "How many ships?" "Preliminary scans show at least 300 vessels, including 12 heavy cruisers and what appears to be a planet-killer-class dreadnought. They're moving toward the Epsilon cluster, but we believe their real target is the Altarian homeworld." Sarah thought about the Altarian students who had been mocking her people just hours earlier, smug, superior, convinced of their own advanced civilization. They had no idea that their entire species was about to face extinction. "What's our response time?" she asked, checking her weapon systems. "That's the problem. The nearest galactic fleet elements are 72 hours away. The Altarian Defense Force has maybe 6 hours before the Korthak arrive. Their ships are advanced, but they're designed for exploration and commerce, not warfare." Sarah understood immediately. The Altarians were brilliant scientists and engineers. Their cities were marvels of architecture, and their technology was centuries ahead of human development. But they had never needed to learn how to fight. The galactic community's peace had made them soft. "You're sending human units," she said. It wasn't a question. "Every available ship, 47 vessels total, including your strike team. The Galactic Council is calling it a humanitarian mission, but we both know what it really is." Sarah sealed her armor and began loading weapons. Once again, the primitive humans get to save the advanced civilizations. Commander Vextar's expression softened slightly. The irony isn't lost on any of us, Lieutenant. The same species they dismiss in their universities and exclude from their elite circles are the ones they call when death comes knocking. Sarah's tactical display activated, showing the deployment grid. Her team would spearhead the assault while larger human vessels engaged the main Korthak fleet. It was a desperate plan with terrible odds, but it was also exactly the kind of impossible mission that humans seem to specialize in. One more thing, the commander added. Maintain operational security. As far as your university is concerned, you're suffering from Rigelian flu and confined to quarters. Sarah almost laughed. Of course. Can't have the other students knowing that the primitive human is actually protecting them. She cut the connection and finished her preparations. In 30 minutes, she'd be aboard the stealth ship Shadowhawk with her hand-picked team. They were all humans, all veterans of previous Korthak encounters, and all officially enrolled in various galactic universities as part of humanity's integration program. The deception ran deeper than her classmates could imagine. The Galactic Council had insisted that humans needed education and cultural exposure to become proper galactic citizens. What they didn't know was that every human exchange student was also a trained operative, strategically placed throughout the galaxy's most important worlds. Sarah thought about her teammate Marcus, currently attending the Vorthon Institute of Technology, while secretly developing new shield harmonics. Or Lisa, studying xenobiology on Kepler Station while actually gathering intelligence on potential Korthak biological weapons. Dozens of humans, all playing the role of humble students while serving as the galaxy's hidden guardians. Her personal effects computer displayed a new message from her study group, wondering if she needed help with tomorrow's assignment on interspecies trade negotiations. Sarah stared at the message for a moment, then typed back that she was feeling ill and would catch up later. If everything went according to plan, she'd be back in time for the midterm exam. If it didn't, her professors would eventually receive notification that she'd returned to Earth due to a family emergency. The truth about where she'd really gone would remain classified at the highest levels of galactic government. Sarah sealed her room and made her way through the dormitory's service corridors. Her route took her past the common area where several students were gathered around a news display. The Altarian students from her economics class were there, their crystalline features bright with excitement. The Colonial News Network is reporting unusual energy signatures near our home system, one of them was saying. Probably just a solar storm, but the authorities are asking everyone to remain calm. Sarah paused in the shadows, watching them dismiss the first signs of their species' greatest crisis. Solar storm. If only they knew that 300 Korthak warships were bearing down on their homeworld with weapons capable of cracking planets. But they would never know if Sarah and her team succeeded. They would go to bed tonight worried about assignments and exams, never realizing that their continued existence depended on the courage of the same humans they considered inferior. The service tunnel led to the university's maintenance sector, where a seemingly ordinary delivery transport waited. Sarah approached the vehicle, and its rear panel slid open to reveal a military-grade personnel compartment. 3 other figures in combat armor were already inside. Martinez, Thompson, Singh, she acknowledged as she took her seat. Ma'am, they replied in unison. Like her, they were all students at various galactic institutions. Like her, they were all veterans of humanity's secret war against the Korthak threat. The transport lifted off silently, its stealth systems engaged. Below them, the university grew smaller as they climbed toward orbit. Sarah watched the lights of the campus fade into the distance, thinking about her classmates sleeping peacefully in their beds. Tomorrow, if they were lucky, those students would wake up and attend their classes and complain about their professors, never knowing how close they had come to waking up as slaves of the Korthak Empire. The transport docked with the Shadowhawk 10 minutes later. Sarah and her team transferred to the strike ship as its captain. A grizzled human veteran named Torres prepared for departure. Mission briefing in 5 minutes, Torres announced over the intercom. We've got a war to win and a species to save. Just another Tuesday for the human race. Sarah strapped herself into her station and activated her tactical systems. In 6 hours, she'd either be a hero again or she'd be dead. But either way, her classmates would never know what she'd sacrificed for them. That was the price of being humanity's hidden guardians. The galaxy's best-kept secret was that its most primitive species had become its most essential protectors. The Shadowhawk's briefing room hummed with nervous energy as Captain Torres activated the holographic display. The tactical situation looked even worse than Sarah had imagined. The Korthak fleet had arranged itself in a perfect assault formation, their massive ships glowing with the distinctive crimson energy signatures that had become humanity's nightmare. Intelligence estimates we have 4 hours before they reach the Altarian homeworld, Torres began, his weathered face grim. The good news is that our fleet has managed to position itself between them and their target. The bad news is that we're outnumbered 6-1. Sarah studied the display, her mind automatically calculating firing solutions and tactical approaches. Around her, the other members of Strike Team Alpha did the same. They were all young, all officially students at various galactic institutions, but their eyes held the cold competence of experienced warriors. "What about the Altarian Defense Force?" asked Martinez, the team's demolitions expert who was supposedly studying advanced chemistry at the Rigel Academy. "They've got 36 ships, all modern designs with excellent shields and sensors. Unfortunately, they're configured for research and patrol duties, not line combat. Their captains have never fired weapons in anger, and their crews have never seen actual battle." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of frustration and pity. The Altarians had built a beautiful civilization based on science and exploration. Their ships were marvels of engineering, their cities were works of art, and their contributions to galactic culture were immense. But they had forgotten how to fight because they'd never needed to learn. "Our mission remains unchanged," Torres continued. "Strike Team Alpha will infiltrate the Korthak command vessel and eliminate their fleet coordination. Without central command, their ships will revert to individual operations, giving our fleet a fighting chance." Thompson, their communications specialist who officially studied interspecies linguistics, raised her hand. "Sir, what's the survival probability for the insertion team?" Torres met her gaze steadily. "Honestly, about 15%. The Korthak have learned to expect human boarding actions. They'll be ready for us." Sarah wasn't surprised by the odds. 15% was actually better than their last 3 missions. The Korthak Empire had been expanding for centuries, conquering species after species with overwhelming force and brutal efficiency. They had perfected the art of crushing civilizations that had grown soft under the galactic community's protection. But they had never faced humans before. Humans who had learned warfare in the cradle of a hostile planet. Humans who had spent millennia fighting each other before turning their attention to the stars. Humans who understood that sometimes the only choice was to stand and die rather than kneel and live. "Questions?" Torres asked. Singh raised his hand. The heavy weapons specialist was supposed to be studying agricultural engineering on Vega Prime. "What about extraction? Are we planning to survive this one?" "The mission comes first," Torres replied. "But if you can find a way to get out alive after completing the objective, I won't complain." Sarah appreciated the honesty. Too many commanding officers tried to pretend that suicide missions weren't suicide missions. Torres had enough respect for his people to tell them the truth. "Insertion in T-90 minutes, Torres announced. "Use the time to prepare yourselves. And remember, regardless of what happens today, you're fighting for every peaceful species in the galaxy. The Korthak don't take prisoners and they don't show mercy." As the briefing broke up, Sarah made her way to the armory to check her equipment one final time. Her weapons were all human-designed, incorporating lessons learned from dozens of encounters with Korthak forces. The galaxy's primitive humans had proven surprisingly innovative when their survival was at stake. Martinez joined her at the weapons rack, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued. "Ever wonder what our classmates would think if they could see us now?" Sarah thought about the Altarian students who had been laughing at human barbarism just hours earlier. They'd probably be horrified. All that violence and aggression they despise, that's exactly what's going to save them. "Think any of them will ever know?" Sarah shook her head. "That's the point. If we do our job right, they'll wake up tomorrow and go to class and complain about their professors, never knowing how close they came to extinction." Thompson appeared in the armory doorway. "Incoming message from the Altarian Defense Force. They want to coordinate their attack with ours." Sarah and Martinez exchanged glances. The Altarians meant well, but their idea of military coordination came from textbooks and simulations. They had no concept of the chaos and improvisation that characterized real combat. "Tell them to stay out of our way," Sarah said. "Let them form a defensive perimeter around their homeworld. When the Korthak fleet breaks formation, they can help with cleanup operations." It sounded dismissive, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt about it. The Altarians were brave in their own way. They simply had never needed to develop the particular kind of courage that involved flying into certain death for the slim chance of saving others. The final hour passed quickly. Sarah and her team ran through their insertion procedures one last time, checked their equipment, and prepared for what would likely be their final mission. The Shadowhawk stealth systems engaged as they approached the Korthak fleet, and Sarah found herself thinking about her professors and classmates. Professor Kexthera would probably spend tomorrow lecturing about humanity's violent tendencies, never knowing that those same tendencies were the only thing standing between her species and slavery. The Zilithian student who had condescended to Sarah would continue his studies in economics, oblivious to the fact that his continued freedom depended on human sacrifice. But that was fine. Sarah had never fought for recognition or gratitude. She fought because someone had to, and humans had proven uniquely suited to the task. Approaching the command vessel, Captain Torres announced over the intercom, "Strike Team Alpha. Prepare for insertion." Sarah led her team to the launch bay where a modified torpedo tube would fire them directly at the Korthak command ship. It was an insane plan that violated every principle of military safety. But insane plans had a way of working when the enemy didn't expect them. "Remember," Sarah told her team as they climbed into the insertion pod, "we're not just fighting for the Altarians. We're fighting for every peaceful species in the galaxy. The Korthak see kindness as weakness and civilization as decadence. They respect only strength." The pod sealed around them, and Sarah felt the familiar mix of terror and exhilaration that preceded combat. In 10 minutes, they would either be inside the enemy command ship or they would be dead. There was no middle ground in this kind of warfare. "Launch in 30 seconds, Torres announced. Sarah closed her eyes and thought one last time about her dormitory room, her textbooks, and her professors who thought humans were primitive. When she opened them again, she was no longer a student. She was a weapon, aimed at the heart of humanity's greatest enemy. The pod launched with a violent acceleration that would have killed most species. But humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day. They were used to violence, adapted for survival, and bred for war. The Korthak were about to learn why that mattered. The insertion pod slammed into the Korthak command ship's hull with enough force to crack the armored plating. Sarah felt her ribs protest against the impact harness, but her adrenaline was already flooding her system with the chemical cocktail that made humans so terrifyingly effective in combat. "Hull breach successful," Martinez reported, his voice steady despite the fact that they were now inside an enemy vessel, filled with creatures that would literally eat them alive if captured. "Thermal charges are cutting through the inner bulkhead." Sarah checked her weapon systems and reviewed the ship's layout one final time. The Korthak command vessel was a massive structure, nearly 2 kilometers long, with the bridge located in the most heavily defended section. Getting there would require fighting through hundreds of enemy troops, automated defense systems, and whatever other surprises the Korthak had prepared. The thermal charges finished their work, and the team dropped into a maintenance corridor that reeked of the sulfurous atmosphere Korthak preferred. Sarah's suit automatically adjusted its filtration systems while her enhanced vision adapted to the dim red lighting that was standard on enemy ships. "Movement detected," Singh whispered, his heavy plasma cannon already powered up. 3 levels down, converging on our position. The Korthak response was faster than expected, but that was fine. Sarah had fought these creatures enough times to know their tactics. They relied on overwhelming force and brutal intimidation, charging their enemies in massive waves while roaring their species' traditional battle cries. It was an effective strategy against most species. The average galactic citizen had never seen violence worse than an argument over academic theory. Faced with 8-foot-tall reptilian monsters wielding plasma claws and screaming for blood, most civilized beings simply froze in terror. But humans were different. Humans had been prey animals once, hunted by creatures far more dangerous than the Korthak. They had developed not just the ability to fight back, but the capacity to become something even more terrifying than their predators. "Thompson, get us a clear path to the command level," Sarah ordered. "Martinez, prepare shaped charges for the blast doors. Singh, watch R6. They moved through the ship like a perfectly coordinated machine, each team member anticipating the other's actions with the kind of synchronization that only came from shared combat experience. It was the kind of teamwork that their professors would never understand, forged not in classrooms but in the crucible of warfare. The first wave of Korthak troops hit them at Junction 7 Alpha. 12 massive warriors came charging around the corner, their plasma claws crackling, with energy in their mouths open and ear-splitting, roars designed to paralyze their prey with fear. Sarah stepped forward to meet them. The first, Korthak died before it could even register the small human standing in its path. Sarah's combat blade found the gap between its armor plates with surgical precision, while her sidearm put 3 rounds into the creature behind it. She moved like liquid death, flowing between her enemies while her teammates provided covering fire. Martinez's explosive charges took out half the attacking force, while Singh's plasma cannon turned the corridor into a killing field. Within 30 seconds, 12 Korthak warriors lay dead, and the humans hadn't taken a single casualty. That's going to bring more of them, Thompson warned, monitoring enemy communications. They're calling in reinforcements from 3 different decks. Sarah reloaded her weapons and checked her ammunition count. They had enough firepower for maybe 2 more engagements like that one, and they were still 6 levels away from the bridge. Change of plans, she decided. We go up through the ship's main shaft. It's more exposed but faster. Her team didn't question the order. They had learned to trust Sarah's tactical instincts, even when those instincts led them into situations that seemed impossible. That was another thing that made humans unique among galactic species. Their willingness to follow leaders into certain death, based on nothing more than confidence and competence. The main shaft was a vertical corridor that ran the entire length of the ship, lined with maintenance platforms and service ladders. It was also completely open to enemy fire from multiple angles, which made it a tactical nightmare. But Sarah had learned something important about the Korthak during previous encounters. They thought like predators, not soldiers. They expected their prey to hide, to seek cover, to act defensively. They never expected anyone to charge directly into their strength. Up the shaft, fast climb, she ordered. Don't stop for anything. They ascended like a force of nature, Sarah leading the way while her teammates provided suppressing fire against the growing number of Korthak troops trying to stop them. The enemy's plasma bolts filled the air around them, but human reflexes and human luck kept them moving upward. At level 12, Singh took a glancing hit that cracked his armor, but didn't penetrate. At level 15, Martinez had to detonate a charge to clear a blockade of enemy troops. At level 18, Thompson's communications equipment was destroyed by enemy fire, cutting them off from their extraction options, but they kept climbing. Sarah thought about her classmates as she fought her way up the shaft. The Altarian students who had mocked human stubbornness would never understand that stubbornness was exactly what made this mission possible. The Vorthan students who had laughed at human emotionalism would never realize that emotion was what gave humans the strength to keep fighting when logic said they should surrender. The Korthak had superior technology, superior numbers, and superior firepower, but they had never learned the most important lesson of human warfare. Sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to lose, regardless of the cost. Bridge level, Martinez announced as they reached the final platform. Heavy security, automated defenses, and at least 20 Korthak guards. Sarah looked at her team. Singh was bleeding from his shoulder wound. Martinez was down to his last few charges, and Thompson was operating without communication support. They were exhausted, outgunned, and facing impossible odds. Perfect conditions for humans to do what they did best. Singh, can you punch through their defensive line? Give me 30 seconds and a clear field of fire. Martinez, what do you need to breach the bridge? 2 charges and someone to watch my back while I place them. Thompson, can you hack their security systems without your main equipment? Not hack them, but I can probably cause some interference. Give them something else to worry about. Sarah smiled grimly. This was what the galaxy's peaceful species could never understand about humans. When faced with impossible odds, other species looked for escape routes or surrender options. Humans looked for ways to make the impossible work anyway. On my mark, Sarah said, checking her weapons one final time. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we don't stop until that command center is ours. She thought about Professor Kexathera's lecture on human emotional decision-making. The professor was right that humans didn't always choose the logical option. Sometimes they chose courage over safety, duty over survival, and sacrifice over self-preservation. The Korthak were about to learn why that made humans the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Mark, Sarah said, and led her team into their final assault. The bridge security corridor erupted into chaos as Sarah's team launched their final assault. Singh's plasma cannon carved through the first line of Korthak defenders like they were made of paper, while Martinez rolled his charges toward the bridge's blast doors with mathematical precision. Thompson sent interference signals cascading through the ship's security network, causing lights to flicker and automated systems to malfunction. But it was Sarah who became the focal point of the battle. She moved through the enemy ranks like something out of their darkest nightmares, her combat blade finding gaps in armor that shouldn't have existed, her reflexes anticipating attacks that hadn't been launched yet. The Korthak had never faced anything like her. More importantly, they had never faced anything like the determination that drove her forward. Every step she took was powered by the memory of colonies burned, civilians slaughtered, an entire species enslaved by Korthak expansion. Every blow she struck was for the peaceful civilizations that couldn't defend themselves. The blast doors exploded inward under Martinez's charges, revealing the command bridge beyond. It was a vast chamber filled with holographic displays and control stations, manned by Korthak officers whose specialized armor marked them as the elite of their species. At the center of it all stood the fleet commander, a massive creature whose scarred hide spoke of decades of successful conquests. Humans. The commander growled in accented universal standard. I should have expected. Your species has become quite the nuisance. Sarah stepped through the smoking doorway, her weapon trained on the alien leader. Around her, she could sense her teammates taking positions to cover the room's other exits. They were surrounded by hostile forces, trapped on an enemy ship millions of kilometers from help, facing odds that would have made any sane species surrender immediately. It was exactly where humans belonged. Fleet Commander Sektar, Sarah replied, recognizing the creature from intelligence briefings. Your invasion ends here. The Korthak leader's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You are 4 individuals against an empire. Your species' arrogance continues to amaze me. Sarah thought about the students she'd left behind at the university, sleeping peacefully while war raged around them. The Altarians who had mocked human primitiveness would wake up tomorrow to find their homeworld still free, never knowing what the cost had been. Our arrogance? Sarah laughed, the sound sharp and dangerous in the tense atmosphere. You're the ones who thought you could conquer peaceful species without consequence. You forgot that someone might actually fight back. Sektar gestured to his bridge crew, and Sarah sensed the shift in the room's energy. The Korthak were preparing to attack, but they were doing it wrong. They were telegraphing their intentions, organizing their response, giving their enemies time to prepare. That was the difference between predators and soldiers. Predators relied on intimidation and overwhelming force. Soldiers understood that sometimes the deadliest enemy was the one who looked weakest. Your human fleet is outnumbered 6-1, Sektar continued. Even if you somehow manage to kill me, my officers will continue the attack. The Altarian homeworld will fall, and their species will join the thousands of others who serve the Korthak Empire. You're right about one thing, Sarah said, her finger finding her weapon's trigger. If I kill you, your officers will continue the attack. But they'll do it without central coordination, without fleet-level tactical planning, and without the combat experience that's kept your empire expanding for 3 centuries. She paused, letting her words sink in. Individual Korthak ships are dangerous. A coordinated Korthak fleet is unstoppable. But a Korthak fleet without proper command? That's just 300 confused captains trying to fight separate battles. Sektar's eyes narrowed. You understand military tactics for a primitive species. We understand something more important than tactics, Sarah replied. We understand sacrifice. The battle for the bridge began and ended in less than 30 seconds. Singh's plasma cannon eliminated half the bridge crew before they could reach their weapons. Martinez's remaining charges destroyed the primary communications array and backup command systems. Thompson's interference signals caused a cascade failure in the ship's targeting computers. But it was Sarah who reached the fleet commander first. Sektar was faster than she had expected, his plasma claws coming within centimeters of her throat. But humans had been fighting larger, stronger, more naturally armed opponents for their entire evolutionary history. They had learned that speed and intelligence could overcome raw physical power. Sarah's blade found its mark just as Sektar's claws found hers. They fell together, predator and prey locked in final combat, both of them bleeding from mortal wounds. You have won nothing. Sektar gasped, his life ebbing away. The Empire will send more fleets. Your species cannot protect everyone. Sarah pressed her hand against the wound in her side, feeling her own strength fading. Maybe not everyone, but we'll protect who we can for as long as we can. That's what you never understood about humans. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because it's the right thing to do. The fleet commander's eyes went dark, and Sarah felt a strange sense of completion. Around her, Martinez and Singh were systematically destroying the bridge's remaining command systems, while Thompson worked to broadcast surrender orders to the Korthak fleet. Fleet coordination is down, Thompson reported. Enemy ships are reverting to individual commands. The human fleet is already engaging separated elements. Sarah tried to stand but found her legs wouldn't support her. The wound was deeper than she had thought, and her suit's medical systems were flashing warning lights that she chose to ignore. Can we get to the extraction point? She asked Martinez. Negative. The corridor we came through is blocked by debris, and there are at least 50 Korthak troops between us and the secondary routes. Sarah nodded, accepting what she had known from the beginning. This had always been a one-way mission. The plan had been to complete the objective and hope for extraction, but hope was a luxury that soldiers couldn't always afford. Singh, how's your ammunition? Enough for maybe one more engagement. Martinez? 2 charges left, but nothing big enough to clear a path through heavy resistance. Sarah looked around the bridge, taking inventory of their situation. They had accomplished their mission. The Korthak fleet was broken. The Altarian homeworld was safe, and another species would survive to mock human primitiveness for another day. It wasn't a bad way to end things. Thompson, can you broadcast a message to the human fleet? Short range only, but yes. Sarah thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about her professors and classmates, about the peaceful species who would never know what had been sacrificed for them, about the galaxy that humans protected from the shadows. Tell them the mission is complete. Tell them the Korthak command structure is eliminated. And tell them that Strike Team Alpha served with honor. She paused, listening to the sound of approaching enemy troops. They would make their final stand here on this alien bridge, fighting for people who would never thank them. And Thompson, add one more thing. Tell them that the primitive humans send their regards. As the first Korthak reinforcements reached the bridge, Sarah Chen smiled and prepared for her last battle. Tomorrow, if there was a tomorrow, she would miss her midterm exam. Professor Kexithera would mark her absent, never knowing that her missing student had saved an entire civilization. It was exactly the kind of irony that made being human worthwhile. The battle for the Korthak bridge had been over for 6 hours, when the rescue team finally cut through the debris blocking the main corridor. Captain Torres led the assault force personally, following the trail of destruction that Strike Team Alpha had carved through the enemy vessel. What they found defied every expectation. Sarah Chen sat propped against the fleet commander's command chair, her armor cracked and her face pale from blood loss but very much alive. Around her, the bodies of over 40 Korthak warriors lay scattered across the bridge deck. Singh was manning a defensive position near the communications array, his plasma cannon still powered and ready. Martinez had turned the bridge entrance into a killing field with his remaining explosives. Thompson was somehow still working at the enemy command console, downloading intelligence data with methodical precision. How? Torres asked, staring at the carnage surrounding the 4 humans. Sarah managed a weak smile. Turns out the Korthak don't handle close-quarters combat as well as they think they do. Once we eliminated their ranged advantages and forced them into individual duels, their superior numbers didn't matter as much. It was a massive understatement. The rescue team's combat analyst would spend weeks trying to understand how 4 humans had held a fortified position against waves of enemy troops. The official report would credit superior tactics, advanced weapons, and exceptional training. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Humans had proven once again that when their backs were against the wall, they became something that the galaxy's other species couldn't comprehend. They became weapons that thought, predators that planned, and warriors that refused to die until their mission was complete. What's the fleet status? Sarah asked as the medical team began working on her wounds. Complete victory, Torres replied. Without central coordination, the Korthak fleet fell apart exactly as you predicted. Individual captains started making independent decisions, breaking formation, even fighting among themselves over who should take command. Our ships picked them off piece by piece. Sarah closed her eyes and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The Altarian homeworld was safe. 3 billion beings would wake up tomorrow to continue their peaceful existence, never knowing how close they had come to extinction. Casualties on our side? Light. 12 ships damaged, 3 destroyed. Total human losses were fewer than 100 personnel. Torres paused. The Altarian Defense Force performed better than expected once the pressure was off. Having friendly targets to protect gave them focus they lacked in open combat. Sarah wasn't surprised. The Altarians were brave when they understood what they were fighting for. They just needed someone else to break the enemy's spine first. The medical team finished stabilizing her wounds and prepared her for transport back to the human fleet. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Sarah caught sight of the Korthak fleet commander's body. Even in death, Sektar's features held an expression of confused rage, as if he couldn't understand how his perfect plan had failed. Sarah could have explained it to him. The Korthak had made the same mistake that most galactic species made when they encountered humans. They had seen a young, primitive civilization and assumed that meant weakness. They had looked at humanity's emotional decision-making and interpreted it as a tactical disadvantage. They had never considered that emotions could be a weapon. The trip back to the human fleet gave Sarah time to think about what came next. In a few days, once her wounds had healed enough to travel, she would return to the university. She would apologize to her professors for missing classes due to illness, catch up on her assignments, and resume her role as just another struggling exchange student. Professor Kexuthera would continue her lectures on human economic inefficiency, never knowing that one of her students had just saved the galactic economy from collapse under Korthak expansion. The Altarian students would resume their casual mockery of human primitiveness, oblivious to the fact that human primitiveness had preserved their species' existence. The irony no longer bothered Sarah. In fact, she was beginning to appreciate it. The galaxy's peaceful species needed to believe that violence was the province of primitive civilizations. They needed to think that their advanced cultures had evolved beyond such barbarism. It was a beautiful illusion that allowed them to focus on art, science, and philosophy instead of warfare. And humans were perfectly willing to maintain that illusion. Let the other species think that conflict resolution should be handled through diplomatic channels and economic sanctions. Let them believe that civilized beings didn't settle disputes through violence. Humans would handle the ugly necessities that kept civilization running, and they would do it quietly enough that the peaceful species never had to confront the cost of their freedom. The human fleet's medical bay was a study in controlled chaos as wounded. Personnel received treatment and mission debriefings were conducted. Sarah found herself assigned to a private room, partly for medical reasons and partly because her mission had been classified at levels that required special security protocols. Commander Vextar arrived an hour after her return, his reptilian features showing the strain of coordinating a battle across multiple star systems. Lieutenant Chen, the Galactic Council wants a full report on the Korthak command structure you eliminated. Sarah wasn't surprised. The Council's member species were all peaceful civilizations that had grown comfortable under the protection of human military forces. They wanted to understand their enemies without having to face them directly. The Korthak rely heavily on centralized command, she began. Individual ship captains are competent but not creative. They follow orders well but struggle with independent decision-making when situations change. Rapidly. She spent the next hour providing tactical intelligence that would help the galaxy's peaceful species understand their enemies. It was information that could save millions of lives in future conflicts. But it would be sanitized and presented in academic terms that removed any reference to the violence required to obtain it. One more thing, Commander Vextar said as he prepared to leave. The Altarian government has requested a meeting with human military leadership. They want to discuss expanding our cooperation in defense matters. Sarah smiled at that. The Altarians had finally learned what humans had known all along. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be prepared for war. Are we going to accept their offer? That's above my pay grade, but I suspect the answer will be yes. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and the peaceful species are finally starting to understand that their safety depends on those of us willing to do violence on their behalf. After the commander left, Sarah lay back in her medical bed and thought about her return to university life. In a week, she would be sitting in Professor Kexathera's lecture hall, listening to discussions about human emotional inadequacies and primitive social structures. She would smile and take notes and play the role of the struggling exchange student, all while knowing that she had personally saved billions of lives and preserved the freedom of multiple species. It wasn't the kind of heroism that got parades or monuments, but it was the kind that mattered most: quiet, professional, and absolutely essential. Sarah Chen closed her eyes and began planning her next assignment. Somewhere in the galaxy, another peaceful civilization would soon need protection from forces they couldn't handle alone. And when that day came, a primitive human would be there to provide it. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen walked back into Professor Kexathera's lecture hall as if nothing had happened. Her medical leave had been officially attributed to Rigelian flu, a convenient cover story that explained her absence without raising questions. The faint scars from her wounds were hidden beneath her standard university clothing, and her slightly stiff movement could be attributed to lingering illness. She took her usual seat in the back row, opened her datapad and prepared to resume her role as an unremarkable exchange student. Around her, aliens from dozens of species chatted about assignments and exams, their conversation a peaceful backdrop to thoughts of war and sacrifice. Today, Professor Kexathera announced, "We'll be examining the economic impact of recent military expenditures. As you all know, the Galactic Council has significantly increased defense spending in response to the so-called Korthak threat." Sarah kept her expression neutral while her classmates murmured among themselves. The so-called threat had been 300 warships bearing down on the Altarian homeworld. But that level of detail hadn't been included in the public reports. The Altarian incident, the professor continued, provides an excellent case study in resource misallocation. The human military response involved 47 vessels and nearly 3,000 personnel, at a cost of over 2 billion galactic credits. One of the Altarian students raised a crystalline hand. "Professor, wasn't the response necessary? Our homeworld was under direct attack." Professor Kexathera's mandibles clicked dismissively. The threat was certainly real, but the scale of the response was typical human overreaction. A properly planned diplomatic initiative could have achieved the same result at a fraction of the cost. Sarah bit back a laugh. A diplomatic initiative against the Korthak would have resulted in the Altarian species being enslaved or exterminated. But her classmates didn't need to know that. They could continue believing that all conflicts could be resolved through rational discussion and economic incentives. The humans' insistence on military solutions, the professor went on, represents a fundamental misunderstanding of modern galactic politics. Violence is the tool of primitive species. Advanced civilizations use negotiation and compromise. The same Altarian student who had spoken before raised his hand again. "But Professor, what if the enemy refuses to negotiate? What if they only understand force?" Sarah found herself leaning forward, interested in the professor's answer. This was the central question that divided human thinking from that of most galactic species. What do you do when facing an enemy that sees your peaceful nature as weakness to be exploited? "That scenario is largely theoretical," Professor Kexathera replied. "No truly advanced species would resort to unprovoked aggression. The Korthak are an aberration, a throwback to earlier evolutionary stages. As they become more integrated into galactic society, their violent tendencies will naturally diminish." Sarah almost choked on that assessment. The Korthak had been integrating into galactic society for 3 centuries, by conquering and enslaving every peaceful species they encountered. Their violent tendencies weren't diminishing. They were expanding across the galaxy like a cancer, but pointing that out would break her cover and destroy the careful illusion that allowed her to operate. Better to let her classmates maintain their comfortable delusions while she and her fellow humans dealt with the harsh realities of galactic politics. Vorthan's student spoke up from the middle of the lecture hall. "What about the reports of human military effectiveness? Some analysts claim that human forces performed exceptionally well during the Altarian crisis." Professor Kexathera waved a dismissive arm. "Human military tactics are certainly energetic, but their reliance on aggression and emotional decision-making makes them unsuitable for complex strategic planning. They're useful as shock troops, nothing more." Sarah thought about the tactical planning that had gone into the Korthak mission. The coordination between multiple human fleets, the precise timing of the insertion operation, the backup plans within backup plans that had ensured mission success even when everything went wrong. But she said nothing. Let the professor believe that humans were simple-minded brutes. It made their real capabilities all the more effective when enemies made the same mistake. The real lesson of the Altarian incident, the professor concluded, is that the galaxy needs to move beyond military solutions. We should be investing in education, cultural exchange, and economic development. These are the tools that will create lasting peace. The lecture continued for another hour, covering economic models and resource allocation strategies that assumed all species were fundamentally rational actors seeking mutual benefit. It was beautiful theory that ignored the reality of predator species like the Korthak, who saw peaceful civilizations as prey to be consumed. When class ended, Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave. As she reached the exit, the Altarian student who had asked questions during the lecture approached her. "Excuse me," he said in accented universal standard. "You're the human exchange student, aren't you?" "Sarah Chen?" Sarah nodded, wondering where this conversation was headed. "I wanted to thank you," the Altarian continued. "I know it's not much, but I wanted someone from your species to know that not all of us dismiss human contributions to galactic security." Sarah was genuinely surprised. "I'm not sure I understand." The student looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. "My family lives on Altaris Prime. During the Korthak attack, my younger sister was in a surface city that would have been destroyed if the enemy fleet had reached our homeworld. The official reports don't give details, but we know that human forces saved our planet." He paused, his crystalline features shifting with emotion. "Professor Kexathara talks about diplomatic solutions and economic incentives, but she wasn't there when the Korthak fleet appeared on our sensors. She didn't see the panic, the terror of an entire population facing extinction. Whatever humans did to stop that fleet, whatever it cost them, my family owes them our lives." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with her healing wounds. This was why she fought, not for recognition or gratitude, but for moments like this, for the knowledge that peaceful beings could continue their existence without having to understand the price of their freedom. "I'll make sure word gets back to the right people," she said carefully. "Though I think most humans would say they were just doing their job." The Altarian student smiled. "That's exactly what makes them heroes." As he walked away, Sarah stood in the empty lecture hall and thought about the strange double life she led. In this room, she was a primitive student from a backward species, struggling to understand advanced galactic concepts. In the hidden corridors of military operations, she was a weapon aimed at humanity's enemies, a guardian standing watch over civilizations that couldn't protect themselves. Both roles were real. Both were necessary, and both were exactly what the galaxy needed, even if it didn't understand that fact. Sarah shouldered her backpack and walked toward her next class. Tomorrow there would be another lecture about human inadequacies, another discussion of how violence was the province of primitive species. Her professors would continue to dismiss her people as emotional and aggressive, while her classmates debated the finer points of peaceful conflict resolution. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships would patrol the borders of known space, watching for threats that the peaceful species preferred not to think about. Human soldiers would train for battles they hoped never to fight, preparing to sacrifice themselves for civilizations that saw them as crude and uncivilized. It was an imperfect arrangement, but it worked. The galaxy's peaceful species could pursue their art and science and philosophy, secure in the knowledge that someone was standing guard in the darkness, and humans could continue to do what they did best, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, asking nothing in return except the chance to serve. Sarah Chen walked across the university campus, unremarkable and unnoticed, carrying secrets that could reshape galactic civilization. In a few hours, she would receive her next assignment. Another mission, another chance to be the weapon that thought, the guardian that watched, the hero who would never be recognized. It was exactly the life she had chosen, and exactly the life the galaxy needed her to live. On the front lines, she was a hero. In class, she was just another face. And that perfect balance was what made humanity the galaxy's most valuable secret weapon.